when we're looking at the first couple questions for these here, numbers 1 through 3, they're asking you for the zeros. Now, when they ask you for the zeros, remember the synonyms for zeros. It means the values of x when y is 0. It is the solutions. It is the roots. They all mean the same thing. Okay? So when they ask me for the zeros, they want to know, where is my parabola crossing the x-axis? So if I look at this one, the zeros are these. That means x is equal to -4 and x is equal to 0. That's the zeros of the graph.
So it's like the vertices?
It's not the vertex, it is the roots, the place where the parabola crosses the x-axis. So please remember that the word zeros means where I cross the x-axis. So looking at number 2, what is the zero of
Right?
x is equal to -2? Exactly. The only zero is -2 because that is where I'm crossing the x-axis. So x is equal to -2.
And that's your answer.
And that's your answer for the zeros of the graph.
I got negative. Oh, solution.
Exactly. Number 3, there are no zeros. It means there's no solution. This means that if I was back in last section where I got tested for where we tested you already on solving, it would mean that the discriminant is negative. It means that if I had this equation, the b squared minus 4ac would be negative, which would mean there's no solution. All right, so that's the zeros. The axis of symmetry is the vertical line that separates the parabola into symmetrical parts. So please remember, very, very important, the axis of symmetry is a line. It is a vertical line. And what is the equation of a vertical line always?
Minus b. Negative.
The axis of symmetry formula is x equals -b over 2a. However, I don't have a function written as an equation. I have a graph. So all I need to do is write x equals, and in this case, it's 0 because it goes through 0.
But it also goes through negative.
So the reason it's x equals 0 is because x is the horizontal axis and my vertical line is going through 0 on the x-axis. That's the reason why it's called x equals 0.
All right.
So what about number 5? What is the equation of the axis of symmetry?
X equals -4.
Fantastic. X equals -4. Okay. Now what about for number 6?
X equals +5.
Very nice. My vertical line is going through 5 on the x-axis, so x equals 5. Please remember, the axis of symmetry is always an x equal to equation. It's always an equation. It's not just a number.
So, will it?
If we look at number 7, it's asking me for the axis of symmetry and the vertex. So they want me to complete they're giving me a guided tour of what I need, basically. They're telling me if you find all of these things step by step. So first of all, if I was asked to find the axis of symmetry and I was not given this step by step, then I know that the axis of symmetry is x equals -b over 2a. This worksheet is just trying to guide you step by step. We know a is 1, we know b is 8. So therefore, the axis of symmetry, -b over 2 times a, gives you -8 over 2, which gives you -4. The axis of symmetry is x equals -4. Please do not forget it's x equals. It's not just -4, it's x equals.
The vertex is when you.
The vertex, exactly. The vertex is that point that I cross that my vertical line, my axis of symmetry, goes through. So if I go back to this parabola, just as a guideline, the vertex would be this right here. And if you think about the vertex for every parabola's vertex is going to be on the axis of symmetry. Every parabola's vertex is on the axis of symmetry. And if that's the case, then the coordinate is always going to be whatever the axis of symmetry's x value is, -4 in this case, comma something.
Oh.
In this case, it's going to be 0, comma something. In number 6, it's going to be 5, comma something. And because of that, since I know that x is equal to, based off of the axis of symmetry, then the vertex I could simply find, I know my vertex is going to be -4, comma, some value of y that I don't know, but I have the function that y is equal to x squared plus 8x plus 12. So if I want to know what is y equal to when x is -4, I am literally going to plug in -4 into my x value. I'm going to get 16 minus 32 plus 12. Well, 16 minus 32 is -16, plus 12 is -4. So when x is -4, it just so happens that y is also -4. And that works because of the fact that that's just the way this equation works. Okay? They just want me to tell you what A is, what B, remember to take the sign in front. So,
Hold up.
I think you guys did that one already. So this is going to give me negative of -10 over 2 times 1. That gives me 10 over 2, which is 5. That means the axis of symmetry is x equals 5. Don't forget, it's an x equal to. If you just wrote 5, it would be wrong. Axis means it's a line, and a line means it has to be a function. That means you have to write it x equals. If you do not write it x equals, it's not correct. The vertex is going to be 5 comma something. When you plug in that 5 to the x, you get 5 squared minus 10 times 5 plus 40. Well, that's 25 minus 50 plus 40. 25 minus 50 is -25 plus 40 is positive 15. So your vertex is 5 comma 15. In order to find the graph of a parabola, they ask you to follow these steps. These steps are actually really easy to follow. So for step 1, they want me to find the axis of symmetry. So let's see. I'm going to actually write up here the axis of symmetry. So the axis is x equals -b, which happens to be 6, over 2 times a. So that gives me -6 over 2, which is -3. So my axis of symmetry is x equals -3. On the graph, that means that at -3, which is right here, I have my vertical line that is going to be my separating into 2 symmetrical parts. Now, from there, I am going to go into the next step, which says plug in the value of x from your axis of symmetry to get your vertex. So my vertex, I know, is going to be -3 comma something. Well, the equation is y is equal to x squared.
Graham, can you put your head up?
The equation is y is equal to x squared plus 6x plus 5. So if I was to follow this, I would say x is -3. I want to know what y is equal to. Y is equal to -3 squared plus 6 times -3 plus 5. -3 squared is 9. 6 times -3 is -18. 9 minus 18 is negative 9. Negative 9 plus 5 is negative 4. So my vertex is negative 3, comma, negative 4. That means that I can actually graph it by going negative 3, comma, negative 4. That is my vertex. Step 3 says, okay, now that you have found your vertex, find the point that contains the y-intercept. Well, if we recall from our y-intercept part, we know that the y-intercept is the value of c, which is 5. If I am a y-intercept, that means my x value is 0. So I am 0, comma 5. That is the actual.
Is it always 0?
Yes, y-intercept is the value of y when x is 0. So if c is 5, it means your y-intercept, in order for you to cross the y-axis, you are located at 0, comma 5. That is a point right there that I know I can graph.
Wait, how do you get 5?
Do we graph?
Now, the next step they want us to do is they want me to find 2 more points on the same side of the axis of symmetry as the y-intercept. You could choose any 2 points. It doesn't really matter. The fact is that when you discover another point that this parabola is going to be going through, so if you were to find a point that's like right here, you know that it reflects on this side. The reason you want to find 2 points is because you want to be as specific as possible. So, I don't know, we already know what happens at 0. Let's see what happens when x is 1. So, when x is 1, y is going to be equal to 1 squared plus 6 times 1 plus 5, which is 6 plus 1 is 7. 7 plus 5 is 12. So 1, comma 12 is going to be a point that I go through.
Wait, how did you know to use?
Let's choose, I don't know, negative 4. Let's see what happens at negative 4. When x is negative 4, negative 4 squared is 16. 6 times negative 4 is negative 24. So 16 minus 24 is negative 8. And negative 8 plus 5 is negative 3. So when x is negative 4, y is negative 3.
I'm a little confused. So you could that part.
The only reason for choosing points is so that you can then be more specific as to how wide your parabola is going to be. So if I plugged in this example, I plugged in negative 4 into my equation. I want to know what is y equal to when x is negative 4. I discovered that it's negative 3. That made it so I know that negative 4, comma, negative 3 is a point. And because of the fact that this is my axis of symmetry, I can immediately make that deductive reasoning that if I have a point that is literally 1 unit to the left of the axis of symmetry, I'm going to have it 1 unit to the right at the same level. So that means I could reflect a point right there. And then if I go back up to this one where I found that this is the y-intercept, the y-intercept is at 5, and it's, if this is my axis of symmetry, 1, 2, 3 to the right. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 to the left, and right there is where I am going to have my other point. Now, when I look at my parabola, I can see that it is really simple to put it all together and connect my dots and make myself my parabola, remembering that it goes on forever in both directions.
So you can just put it opposite.
The way that they have here, the steps, find 2 more points, blah, 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 graph the parts, reflect the points, these are just guidelines. If you guys understand that what you really need to do is, number 1, find the axis of symmetry. That's the most important part. Because once you have the axis of symmetry, you know the x value of your vertex to plug in to get the y value. Once you have the axis of symmetry and you have the vertex, If you have the y-intercept, you know you can reflect it to the other side of the axis of symmetry. And if you find one more point, you can reflect it to the other side. So this step 4 is basically finding points. And the points could include the y-intercept. If I was to summarize my steps, I would actually say step 1 is the axis of symmetry. Step 2 is the vertex. Step 3 is the y-intercept. And step 4 is reflect some points. Axis, vertex, y-intercept, reflect. The axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2a. This question does not have a b. The bx is not there, is it?
No.
So that means that b is equal to 0. So that means if I had my format, it would be ax squared plus bx plus c. The c is 6, the a is negative 1/2, b is 0. So that means x is equal to 0 over, it doesn't matter what the bottom is, 0 divided by anything is just 0.
So it would be no solution.
So, no, it's not no solution. X equals 0 is my axis of symmetry. Remember, zeros are numbers too.
Oh, yeah.
What this is telling you is that your vertical line is going to be going through 0. That's my axis of symmetry. X equals 0 is actually the equation of the y-axis because it's the y-axis that goes through 0 on the x. Now that I have that, I go to the vertex. I know my vertex has to be 0 because that's what the axis of symmetry is,
0,
comma something. I don't know what the vertex is yet, so remember that to find the y value when x is 0, you plug 0 in to the x. So we have negative 1/2 times 0 squared plus 6. Well, 0 squared is 0 times negative 1/2 is 0. 0 plus 6 is 6. When x is 0, y is 6. That's my vertex. That means 0, 6 is where I go through. That's my vertex right there. 0, 6. Now in this case, my y-intercept is also 6. So this is telling me that I can't reflect that 0, 6 because the 0, 6 is the y-intercept and the vertex. So because my y-intercept is the vertex, your job is to figure out what happens to the left and to the right of this parabola. So when you go to reflect some points, you are going to probably choose maybe -2 or -1, or both, -2 and -1. Let's see what happens. What is y equal to when x is -1? Well, if the equation is y equals -1/2 times x squared plus 6, and I'm saying x is -1, 1 squared, -1 squared is 1. 1/2, -1/2 times 1 is -1/2. And -1/2 plus 6 is 5.5. When x is -1, y is 5.5.
In the bathroom.
The way that you would zoom this in would be like this. When x is -1, y is 5.5. Well, if this is 4 and this is 5, 5.5 is somewhere between. So -1, 5.5. That means I can reflect that point to this side. 1, 5.5. So my vertex is kind of big right there because I zoomed in. Now I'm going to choose -2 and see what happens when x is -2. Y is equal to -1/2 times -2 squared plus 6. -2 squared is 4. -1/2 of 4 is actually -2. And -2 plus 6 is equal to 4. So when x is -2, y is equal to 4. When x is -2, y is 4. That means I can reflect it to the other side. When x is 2, y is positive 4. Now that I have several points, I can connect the dots and make my parabola.
So then it's a maximum?
So now, that's exactly right. The vertex is called a maximum because it's opening down. And if I was to look at my ax squared plus bx plus c, I would notice that a is negative, so it's supposed to be opening down. That means I did it correctly.
Wait, then
So now 8.4 asks you to solve each quadratic equation. Your job last section was to solve using the quadratic formula, square roots, or by factoring. Your job now is to solve by graphing. If I was to be asked to solve this, I could factor, or I could use the quadratic formula. They would tell me what my x is equal to, what the roots were, the zeros. That's what all of that does. So when you're solving for a quadratic, you are asked to find the x-intercepts. You're asked to find what x is equal to when y is 0. We're not going to factor this time around. We're not going to use the quadratic equation this time around. We are going to graph it to see where I cross the x-axis. In order to graph, you need to find the axis, find the vertex, find the y-intercept, and find some points to reflect.
what we just did.
Exactly the same thing.
Why is it separate?
So, in order to find the zeros, I have to find what the graph looks like so I can see where it crosses the x-axis. The axis of symmetry is x equals negative b over 2a. A is 1, b is negative 4. So x is equal to the opposite of negative 4 over 2 times a, which is 1. This gives me positive 4 over 2, which is 2, so that means x equals 2 is my axis of symmetry. That is going to help me to go like this. I know that that's my vertical line. It is going to guide me to finding the vertex because I know my vertex must be what? 2 comma something. Well, that's when you change this equation into y equals instead of 0 equals. Y equals x squared minus 4x plus 4. You want to know what is y equal to if x is 2, as it asks me to substitute. Bless you. 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 negative is negative 8. So 4 minus 8 is negative 4. Negative 4 plus 4 is 0. When x is 2, y is 0. 2 comma 0 is my vertex.
On the tester.
My y-intercept is positive 4. Looking at my parabola equation, I know a is positive, so I know it has to open up. If I have discovered, because of the fact that there is a point at 4, 2 to the left of the axis of symmetry, I am going to make one at 4, 2 to the right, because the axis of symmetry reflects it. Guess what, guys? Now I have enough points to connect my dots and make my parabola. I have graphed the parabola, but the question said, hey, what are the solutions? In other words, where do I cross my x-axis? At 2. So your solution is x equals 2.
Wait, where?
With this question,
There is no C.
with this question, it's not set in standard form. You have to set it equal to 0. So you're going to put x squared plus x minus 6 equals 0. Now I can identify the A and the B and the C. The order of which you are solving this or graphing it is really up to you I just use the axis, vertex, y-intercept, points to reflect to help you. I know the axis of symmetry is x equals negative of b, which is 1, over 2 times a, which is 1. Negative 1 over 2. X equals negative 1/2. That is the axis of symmetry. So, yeah, that's annoying because if I asked you to graph it, you would notice that negative 1 is here and negative 1/2 is between 0 and negative 1. So I would make a dotted line right there. This question is only asking you for the roots. So it wants to know where I cross my x-axis. So when I go from there, if I wanted to graph the whole thing, I would then find the vertex. The vertex is located at negative 1/2 comma something. That means that if I take my function and rewrite it from equals 0 to y equals 1x squared plus x minus 6, and I plugged into the x value, I actually plugged in negative 1/2. Thank goodness for calculators now. Negative 1/2 squared is 1/4. 1 times 1/4 is 1/4. 1/4. So 1/2 is really 2/4. So 1/4 minus 2/4 is negative 1/4. And negative 1/4 minus 6 is negative 6 and 1/4. So when x is negative 1/2, y is negative 6 and 1/4. So that means I'm going to go to, if this is negative 7, negative 6 and 1/4 is like right there. I don't have to be precise. Okay? Now that I have the vertex, I am going to find where I cross the y-axis. I'm sorry, the y-axis is this one. Negative 6. So when I go to negative 6, that's where I'm going to cross the y-axis. That means I can reflect that point. If my axis of symmetry is half over to here, I'm going to go half over to here. That's not going to help me with discovering where I cross the x-axis. So what you're going to have to do in order to find that, if you recall what it means to be asked to find the zeros, when you're asked to find the zeros, you are finding what is the value of x when y is 0. So you have your equation. And you're now, what I would do is I would go straight into factoring. When you factor that, you're going to get x plus 3 times x minus 2. So what does that mean about x? What is x equal to?
3.
And
Negative 2.
X equals negative 3 and positive 2. So that means you're going to cross at negative 3 and positive 2. And that is my parabola. So you notice that I had to factor in order to find the solutions, which are the x-intercepts. You could have used x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a to find what x is equal to. When you are asked to find the zeros, you are being asked to find the x-intercepts, or the roots, or the values of x when y is 0. So for these questions, this last question that you are expected to do, in order to solve it, you are going to find the axis of symmetry. I want you to find the vertex, and then you could either use the quadratic formula, x equals opposite b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Or you could factor in order to solve for what x is equal to, which is going to be the x values on there.